Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our meeting of Monday, November the 1st. A quick reminder that our meeting will be recorded up until the Sergeant at Arms, at which point recording will be paused. I have muted everyone's connection. You have the ability to unmute yourself if you have a question or an announcement to make later on in the meeting. So first of all, today, I will call upon Malcolm to introduce our guest speaker.
Mute here. Thank you, Don. As the 2021 United Nations Climate Change Conference, known as COP26, which is the 26th United Nations Conference, is being held in Glasgow right now, it's timely that our speaker today is Mr. Frans Koch. With his BA in Engineering Physics from the University of Toronto and his Master of Science in Computer Science from the University of Calgary, Frans worked for the Canadian International Development Agency, CIDA, for 20 years, and he had postings in Northern Nigeria, Tanzania, and Egypt. Followed that by 2 years with Science and Technology Division in the Department of Foreign Affairs. For the last 10 years, his career was the secretary of 2 task forces on the International Energy Agency dealing with electric vehicles and hydropower. His presentation today will outline the action that needs to be taken in different economic sectors to reduce the impact of climate change. And this perhaps centered around the SMR's small modular reactor.
Thank you very much, Malcolm, for inviting me to give this presentation and for your kind introduction. My late father was a very active member of Rotary in Clarkson in Mississauga. And so I've always had a great admiration for Rotary and all the good people that work in it. And so I'm very pleased to be able to give you this presentation today. Okay, so in this presentation, it will be in 3 parts. The first part will be how much electricity is consumed in the world today and how much will be needed in the future. Then in the second part, I will talk about how we can generate this needed electricity without burning fossil fuels. And I'll look at the pros and cons of some of the generation options. And then part 3 will be the main part, which will be generation for nuclear power and small modular reactors. So part 1, how much electricity is consumed today and how much will be needed? Well, this is the global electricity consumption in 2016. We need to look at this whole subject on a global basis, of course, because climate change is a global issue. And what happens in one particular country isn't all that relevant compared to the global situation. So the world consumed about 24,900 terawatt hours of electricity in 2016. Canada was about 650, and terawatt hours are not terribly meaningful to many people. If you think of the Ontario off-peak electricity rate of 8 cents per kilowatt hour, this 24,900 terawatt hours would be about $2 trillion. So that is the amount that is being consumed worldwide in electricity. It's increasing by about 3 or 4% a year. And an exception actually was last year when a lot of the developed world shut down. The electricity did not increase by 3 or 4% a year, but we're now catching up, and I think for the current year it will again be increasing by that amount. Okay, let's look at the economic sectors again on a global basis where the greenhouse gases come from. Well, electricity and heat production account for 25%, industry 21%, agriculture surprisingly large 24%, and transportation is surprisingly small 14%. And again, that's because these figures are worldwide. In the developing countries, of course, you don't have as much cars and transportation as you do in the richer countries. So The buildings, again, it's a surprisingly small 6%. That also is a lot more in Canada because of our climate. But then on the other hand, in Canada, our electricity and heat production is a lot less than 25% because we have so much hydropower. Okay, so the world needs to do three things. The transportation sector, the building sector, part of the industry sector need to replace fossil fuel by carbon-free electricity. Secondly, year after year, we need to meet the increasing demand for electricity with non-fossil fuels. And then thirdly, we need to replace the existing fossil fuel electricity generation by non-carbon means. Okay, here we are. On this slide, you can see the role of fossil fuels in electricity generation today. The black slice of the pie is coal. The orange tan slice of the pie is gas. The blue slice is hydropower, the green slice is renewables, and the red slice is nuclear. So you see that much more than half of the current generation is fossil fuels, and that will need to be replaced by non-carbon generation technologies. Okay, so we can go back to part 2 now. What are the options for meeting this challenge? Well, you're probably familiar with these options. There's wind, there's solar, there's hydropower. The sun is concentrated on the top of the tire, which gets extremely hot, and in the top is a salt which melts, and that molten salt at a temperature of about 600 degrees is then stored and used to make electricity either during the day or at night. I would also like to mention that for hydropower, it is the only large-scale means that we have these days of storing electricity. Simply store the water behind a dam or pump water up to a reservoir. And batteries are starting to become economical for some very specialized applications, but on a large scale, batteries are far too expensive. So here are some other means. There's geothermal. The picture on the bottom there is actually in Iceland. The clouds that you see are a geothermal electric generating station, and they use the hot water coming out of the plant for a big attraction, a swimming pool called the Blue Lagoon. The picture on the top is an interesting one because it's in Saskatchewan. They're testing out a facility to actually remove carbon dioxide from the smokestack of a coal generating plant and then store it. This is called carbon capture and storage. And right now that costs from $600 to $800 per ton, which is far too expensive. But if our carbon tax goes up to $170 and the cost of that comes down, it might have potential. Okay, so what is going on? We've read in the newspapers the past week and so that the energy and electricity shortages in Europe and England and China. The world at this time is planning or building 1,000 new coal plants because it needs this new capacity equivalent to 250 coal plants per year. And most of these are being built in the developing countries such as China, India, Indonesia, South Africa, etc. These countries on a per capita basis are still generating less than 1/10 the amount of greenhouse gases that we are generating here in Canada. And so new coal plants continue to be built and will continue to be built. So based on the current state of knowledge, there's a huge capacity gap that will not be met by wind and solar. I'd like to introduce a caveat here just to say that I agree with Yogi Berra. It's hard to make predictions, especially about the future. And there's some predictions there that have not panned out in the past. So things could happen that are unforeseen at this time, either in favor of renewable energies or against renewable energies. But at the present, this is not known. So based on the current state of knowledge, there will be this huge capacity gap that cannot be met by wind and solar. Okay, now let's turn to nuclear power. It's an essential part of the solution, but why do so many people dislike it? Well, the issue of perceived safety. We had 3 infamous accidents at and Fukushima. And Italy banned nuclear reactors after Chernobyl. Germany banned them after Fukushima. So in many countries, nuclear power is perceived as unsafe. But that is simply not true. If you compare the number of accidents and victims and people who died or were injured by other electricity generating ways, such as coal, gas, or hydro, they've had at least 10 times as many victims and often many, many more. For coal generation, the number of victims is in the millions because of mining accidents and air pollution and so on. So although nuclear is perceived as unsafe, it is only a perception. Statistically, it's not true. Okay, the second issue is nuclear waste. People are concerned because some of it can remain radioactive for thousands of years and could be a burden on future generations. The third issue that has arisen in the last 10 or 20 years is cost. There have been huge cost overruns and delays in France, in Finland, in the USA. Costs have increased from 3 billion to more than 8 billion, and construction delays have gone from 5 years to 15 years. So in the countries mentioned, this has become a major issue. But in other countries, such as China and Korea, this has not been an issue of any magnitude. So what can we say about the nuclear power that we've used over the past few decades until today? Well, in spite of the issues of perceived safety, waste, and cost, the industry has produced 15 to 20% of the world's electricity in about 450 nuclear plants. In Ontario, 60% of our electricity has come from nuclear power for several decades, and we've never had any problems or any major incident. And similar to the airline industry, if one nuclear facility experiences an issue or a technical problem, they will immediately inform the entire industry, all 450 other plants. And so as the years have gone by, the industry has improved step by step, year by year. Many of the plants that are currently in operation are actually coming to the end of their licenses, which are usually for 20 or 30 years. And so they will have to modernize, update their equipment and so on, and make more capital investments in order to get a license for another 20 or 30 years. But this will still be one of the cheapest ways of increasing our capacity for non-carbon electricity. Okay, well, that was the past and the present. Let us now look at the future. What does Generation 4 nuclear power have in store for us? Well, it addresses these issues that I've just mentioned. The issue passive safety is being introduced into many of these reactors, which means that no human intervention or man-made device will be needed to shut down the reactor safely. If something goes wrong in the reactor, it will shut down automatically without requiring an operator to take action or without requiring man-made devices such as pumps to cool the reactor down. Okay, the generation 4 are designing reactors that can actually burn nuclear waste. This is not a completely new technology, but it's being more widely applied. So the world has accumulated a very large amount of nuclear waste, both from previous power generators and also weapons, especially weapons, which are now being retired. And so instead of having to store these for hundreds of years, the waste will now be used to generate more electricity. Another characteristic of generation 4 is that many of these reactors will actually be produced in factories rather than having to be built on site. And they will be smaller, they will be modular, and they will be built in factories. And so, and then transported by truck or barge to the site. The economies of serial production should address this cost problem that I've mentioned in the United States and other places. So because these reactors are much smaller and don't operate under high pressures, they will not require containment buildings. And it's these containment buildings have been responsible for the big cost overruns in many cases. They will also often be cheaper than fossil fuels. And I will talk more about the small modular reactors, but it's also true that in generation 4, they will continue to build full-size reactors and of a modern design. And these may well in the end produce more electricity than the smaller ones. Okay, so how do generation 4 small modular reactors work? You've all heard of submarines and icebreakers and aircraft carriers that are powered by nuclear power. So a small reactor is not really a new idea. They've been around for decades. What is new is that they're going to modify or design new ones that are commercially feasible. The ones in the military are often use very highly enriched uranium, which is not easily available, and they have been very expensive to operate. So the innovation here is that it will be adapted for commercial purposes. And on the bottom of the picture, you can see a Russian ship, the Akademik, which is currently anchored off the north coast of Siberia, not too far from Alaska, and supplying a town with small modular reactors. So the technology already exists, although a lot more of it is still under development. Talking about development, there are at least 30 projects in many different countries underway of designing and building these new small modular reactors. Some of these designs, like on the ship that you see here, are basically the old pressurized water designs, which have been around for many years. But many new innovative designs are also coming along. And I'd like to mention two of these. This is the Multex reactor, which is being developed in New Brunswick. So New Brunswick, as you may know, has a nuclear power station at Point-le-Preau. And they are concerned that it's costing money and it's inconvenient to have to store all this nuclear waste. So they would be very interested in being able to burn it instead. And the Multex company has come along with an ingenious fuel assembly, which you see in the middle of the picture there. And this fuel assembly will allow it to burn nuclear waste. And almost everything else of the plant, the core module and so on, is similar to existing technology. So they don't have to reinvent the wheel for everything. They only have to reinvent the new fuel assembly. And they're actively working on this. And so this is one promising technology that we may see at the end of this decade. Another one is a company in Oakville, Ontario. It's designing the integrated molten salt reactor. They've got about 100 people working on this as we speak. And so the picture is perhaps a bit too full of new things. So let me explain how molten salt reactors work, and then we'll come back to this picture. So how do molten salt reactors work? Well, if you take any metal, such as sodium or uranium, and you react it with a gas, such as chlorine or fluorine, you get a salt. If you react sodium with chlorine, you get sodium chloride, which is table salt. You can do the same with uranium. You can react it with chlorine or fluorine and get a uranium salt. And so these salts, they all have a melting point. Every substance has a melting point. For uranium salt, it's about 1,000 degrees. For table salt, it's about 800 degrees. But a good chemist can design or invent salts that have melting points all the way up and down the scale. And so they've looked to design a salt that has a melting point of about 450 degrees. The salt is called Flybe, and it was used for a first molten salt reactor. So if you take this molten salt at, say, 450 degrees or 460, you can dissolve things into a liquid. We know that you can dissolve a sugar cube into tea. Similarly, if you have uranium salt, you can dissolve that into a liquid. And by doing that, you get a liquid, which is liquid from 460 degrees onward. And in it is dissolved the uranium salt, which is the fuel for the reactor. So now we can look at this picture again, and we can see all the light yellow in the picture is a liquid salt with uranium dissolved in it. And the gray bars, the vertical bars, are graphite, which is needed to keep the nuclear reactor going. And so as the liquid salt rises in between the graphite vertical bars, it gets hotter and hotter because of the nuclear reaction that's taking place. And so it rises to the top, and at the top, the heat is extracted in those S-shaped tubes that you see. They're called heat exchangers. They will extract the heat that's just been generated. And so now the liquid salt is cooler again, and it will drop down to the bottom of the reactor, and the whole process will start all over again. So there's a continuous cycling from bottom to top, and a continuous extraction of the heat that's produced. And this heat is then stored in a secondary coolant heat exchanger that you can see. And that is a very useful way of generating energy, because the secondary coolant can be stored for a long time. If it's not so difficult to keep something hot if you insulate it well. So you have the energy stored in the secondary coolant exchanger, and you can then use it. Excuse me, let me. For many different applications, either electricity generation or backing up wind or solar when it's night or the wind is not blowing, or for industrial processes. So the features of these molten salt reactors are that they have a temperature of about 600 degrees, which is very useful. The standard Canadian CANDU reactors that are used today have temperatures of about 300 degrees. So this is twice as much, and I think twice as useful. A key characteristic is that they don't operate under pressure. In our technology today, you can have pressures of 75 to 150 times atmospheric pressure, which represents a risk, because if something goes wrong, things are under high pressure and you have to deal with that, and you need containment structures and so on. So another important benefit is that they don't produce dangerous or radioactive gases, because these gases are dissolved in the liquid. And so this is another safety feature. There are challenges to designing these things and bringing them into production, because these hot salts can be very corrosive, and the nuclear reactors can affect the metal and the containment vessels. The costs for molten salt reactors at this time, they're a bit uncertain because they're still under development, but it's claimed that they will be comparable or cheaper than existing light water reactors. So we talk about small reactors. You may wonder, just how small are they? Well, here you see a picture of a Volkswagen on the left-hand side, and a 25 megawatt reactor, which could be used for a mining town or another small town, is about 3 times the size of a Volkswagen. If you take a 300 megawatt reactor, which is about 1/3 the size of a normal power station, you have about 10 times the size of a Volkswagen. And then beside that, you have a new scale reactor, the very tall one on the left-hand side of the picture. It's still called small and modular because it doesn't generate all that much electricity. And it will still be built in factories and transported by truck or train to the site, but it's substantially larger. On the right-hand side of the picture, you can see the kind of the size of the building that would be needed. You see a little man standing there. And in the building, you can see that they would have several vaults, one for the reactor, one for the heat exchanger, and one for the turbine, the generator. And there are 2 empty vaults, so that at the end of its life, the reactor will simply be switched out and a new one put in its place. And the old one will be put in one of these empty vaults for a few years until the radioactivity dies down. Okay, so what can we see? What can we say now as a summary? Well, there is a gap between the global demand for electricity and the ability of wind, solar, and other technologies to meet this demand. This gap is currently filled by fossil fuels. It's highly likely to persist for several decades to come. And so we would be well off if we could substitute nuclear power for these fossil fuels. Generation 4 nuclear technology is able to fill this gap. The 3 issues of perceived safety, nuclear waste, and high cost are being addressed in Generation 4. The reactors are walk-away safe. You don't need human intervention or mechanical devices to shut them down. The new technology can burn a large portion of the nuclear waste from civil and military applications. It's estimated that in the United States alone, there's enough nuclear waste to meet the entire electricity demand of the country for the next 1,000 years. So that's just a waste. So the cost being addressed by and moving to the economies of factory production instead of large-scale on-site construction. So what we can say about small modular reactors is that there are at least 30 being developed in different countries and different places, and that Canada is very active in this field. They're not all small modular reactors are the same. Some of them are designed for specific economic niches, such as a remote site or burning waste or general production of electricity. These 30 or so development projects are by and large enjoying very solid financial support from private and government sectors, and this augurs well for actually bringing them to a commercial stage over the next 10 years. Many of the designs will operate without needing to be refueled or needing maintenance shutdowns. The one that's designed in Oakville, for example, would operate for 7 years, and then the cartridge or the reaction vessel would simply be switched out and be replaced by another one. Some of the others are being designed for 20 or 10 years of operation at the plant site. And so this makes the whole decommissioning process much easier too. And the use of molten salt enables the energy to be stored and then to be used as a support for wind or solar. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. I'd be very pleased to answer any questions that you may have.
So we will open it up for questions. You can use the raise hand reaction if you have a question. Go ahead, Jerry.
Hi, good afternoon, Frans. Frans, I'm quite sure you are familiar, or I would think you are familiar with the city of Freiburg in Germany and their sustainability and green city. It's about half of the size of London, and I've been to the city a couple of times, look at their projects, and it's really interesting. But I never honestly ever found out in terms of ROI, return on investment, certainly for a green city, for environment, fantastic. But did you ever hear about it, or kind of what is the return on investment on that project of the entire city?
No, I don't. I'm not familiar with that particular city. Although I've heard of the name, but that's all. They generally, the economists have a measure which is called the levelized cost of energy, which takes into account building the plant, operating it, decommissioning it, and so on, and then dividing that by the amount of electricity that has been produced over the lifetime of that plant. And on this measure, nuclear actually comes out at a reasonable cost. Solar comes out very low, but that's usually when you see solar, they don't figure in the cost of storing, and just to put in a solar panel is easily enough, but to store the solar energy, which needs to be done, is not always taken into account.
I agree with you, and that's a part of the equation that I'm kind of always missing to get the whole picture. But if you have a time, take a look at it. I think it's a city of about 230,000 people, and they've done a fantastic job in last, 10, 12, 14 years. Thank you.
Yes.
Go ahead, Sharad.
Thank you. Thank you, Frans, for a great presentation. I guess my question for yourself is, I wonder if you could comment on the cost of SMRTs versus another relatively greener option, such as gasification of coal. And I say that only because the world is pretty much awash in coal. It's, there's a reason why countries all over the world are burning this stuff. It's everywhere. And, we're looking for cheaper ways of producing energy. So why not, why SMRTs versus finding a more efficient relatively greener way of using a substance that is readily available?
Well, the gasification technology, of course, it makes the coal plant more expensive, but it also increases the energy efficiency of the coal plant. And so coal and actually coal is now more expensive than natural gas. You have, if you use the natural gas in a so-called combined cycle generating plant, it is the cheapest way of the fossil fuels. The both advanced coal technologies and natural gas, depending on the market price of coal, of course, and gas, which keeps going up and down. And right now, the market price of gas is way up compared to a year ago. So they can at times be cheaper than, say, small modular reactors. The thing about the small modular reactors is that the uranium fuel actually costs next to nothing. There's so much uranium in the world, and there's all this stored waste uranium, that once you've met the capital cost of a nuclear facility, you have paid what it will cost, and the fuel costs very little. But at times, if coal prices are low or gas prices are low, they might be lower cost than nuclear.
Rashad, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. I didn't have anything complicated. I was just wondering if the Bruce Power facility, first of all, it recently reached a new peak power. I follow up with it quite a bit. But in the last year, there was a substantial investment back in Bruce Power to extend the lifetime of it. Do you believe that was the best use of the funding, or could we have started creating the microgrids with the smaller plants that you were talking about?
They both have a role to play in supplying electricity for Ontario. You have the so-called base load power, which is the amount of electricity that you consume at 3 o'clock at night, when almost everything is turned off, but not everything. So that's called the base load. And to meet that, a nuclear plant is very good because it operates 24 hours a day and at full power usually. If you have, beside that, if you have smaller facilities that can meet the peak load at 5 o'clock in the afternoon or something, then you have a good combination. So I think the Bruce is a good investment, and electricity prices may well rise if you see what's going on in the world today. So that by putting in this investment now, Ontario will be good for the next 30 years or so. And the smaller plants could be used during peak times or even during peak seasons.
Jim Swan.
A couple of questions. One, there was a time when almost every town near a river had hydropower that powered the mills. What's the feasibility of renewing that and having local hydropower in communities that's renewable downstream?
Yeah.
And the second question is, are any of the companies developing these modular nuclear things publicly traded so that we could support them with investment? So two separate questions there.
Yeah, about small hydropower, this is actively encouraged by the federal government and the Ontario provincial government. Again, if you do the numbers, they don't provide a lot of electricity. There are some farmers that may have a stream running through their land and that can put in a small hydropower station and maybe make a few hundred or a few $1,000 a year by doing so. But on the scale of things, it is relatively unimportant. But in Canada, we still have a very large amount of hydro potential that is not being developed, that is not yet been developed. In northern Manitoba, in British Columbia, in Quebec. And so there's still a lot of potential remaining. Of course, some members of the public don't like it, even in remote wilderness sites, if you build a hydropower plant. So getting what they call the social permission can be up to 20% of the cost nowadays. The second question was, can you invest in any of these companies? Some large, well-known companies are developing these, including, for example, Rolls-Royce. And they've said that they will produce a small modular reactor by 2030. And other well-known companies such as General Electric and Hitachi and so on are all developing small modular reactors. But of course, if you invest in those companies, the small modular reactors are a very small part of their operation. And even if it becomes a huge success, it won't move the needle very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Frans. I remember when I was young, not that many years ago, and the CANDU reactor was the big thing, and nuclear power was the future. And it's interesting to hear that there is still reactor development happening in Canada, and there is still a future for nuclear power in Canada and I guess around the world. And it will hopefully solve some of the problems that we are dealing with from a global warming perspective, and hopefully taken into account during the COP26 meetings that are happening this week. On behalf of the Rotary Club of London, we would like to present you with a certificate of recognition in recognition of your presentation to our club today. We have made a contribution to the Polio Plus campaign of the Rotary Foundation to immunize 50 infants against polio. Because of you, Rotary is one step closer to a polio-free world. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. And I really appreciate the contribution that you've made for the Polio Foundation. I know that there's a very large effort underway to eliminate it completely. And so I'm very pleased that you made this contribution on my behalf. Thank you.
Now, at this point, we tell all of our speakers that if you have other things that you have to attend to, feel free to leave, but you're also welcome to stick around for the next 15 minutes of our meeting. So it's your choice if you need to go. Otherwise, please stick around and enjoy the rest of our meeting.
Okay, I will stick around if I may.
Thank you. The first announcement that I have is a note that November is Rotary Foundation Month. And today is November 1st, and it's the start of the month. We will be talking about the Rotary Foundation. We'll go into a little bit of detail about each of the different funds involved in the Rotary Foundation, as well as how you can contribute to it and why you should contribute to it over the course of this month. The first learning tidbit this week is that the foundation is composed of 3 funds, and we will talk about these more: the annual fund, the endowment fund, and the Polio Plus fund. And the first 2 we're going to learn more about if after the last few weeks of talking about World Polio Day and Polio Plus and Rotary's campaign to eradicate polio, I am hoping everyone is very aware of what the Polio Plus Fund is. The second announcement, and I think Diane is here. Diane, are you here to talk about the Rotarian of the Year?
I am here. Hello, everybody. Yes, so the Honorable Ray Lawson Rotarian of the Year Award nominations are now open, and the award can be granted to all members except for last year's board of directors or previous recipients. And I believe those names are on the website. There's a link on the left-hand side to the Rotarian of the Year Award, and you can see who those people are, or feel free to shoot me an email and I'll let you know if your nominee is eligible. And the form is on the website, and just complete the form and send it to me by November 15th is when I will be presenting a recommendation to the board. Thank you.
Thank you. And Jim Swan, do you have an announcement about the Salvation Army kettles?
Well, yes, the kettles, the shifts are all filled. The only demand we have at this point are some people that need to shift things around, and we'll do that. But all shifts are now occupied for our attendance at Angelo's. So thanks to everybody who has volunteered. I'll send out the final sheet so that you can highlight your duty shift and make sure that you're there. And we will have aprons available for all at the site.
Wonderful. And Rick, do you have an announcement for bingo?
Yeah, sadly, the bingo that was to be going on tonight, it has been canceled. The bingo hall has been suffering with the new requirements to check all patrons at the door for their COVID, their vaccination status. They are finding that their players are dwindling in terms of numbers, and they have decided to close off and not open for bingos on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays. We were scheduled to have a bingo tonight. What we don't know, and this is just a decision that they've made for the month of November, but it does not augur well for the future. What we don't know is what December, January, February, etc. is going to look like. It's unfortunate for the club because we thought we were getting back into what has been a very nice fundraiser for us that's generated, outside of the pandemic, has generated between $8,000 and $10,000 a year for our fundraising for the club. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens. The market, she isn't changing. There's no doubt about it. I think the internet is taking over. There's lots of access for gamblers to do it safely at home rather than have to come out. And I hope it's not the case that bingo players are that come out in public are those that don't want to get their vaccination, but I don't know. And I don't want to do that survey. But I will let you know, right now we are scheduled for a bingo for Tuesday, December the 7th in December. And we'll see whether that is going to happen or not. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I have a quick announcement on behalf of the Rotary Club of London South. They are doing their heritage Christmas tree ornaments again this year. They've added some additional ornaments, including Marion Baden-Chaucer's. I'm pretty sure Jerry already has a couple of those. Their ornaments are all available to order online at www.rotaryornaments.com. And we will close off the meeting with just some reminders about our upcoming meetings. So next Monday will be our Remembrance Day meeting. And then the following Monday will be Mary Edith Drost from L'Arche, London. The Satellite Club meeting tomorrow night, it will be their new member, Sahar, who will be doing her About Me talk. We have a Rotary Club of London board meeting on the 17th at 5 p.m. And as always, every week, tomorrow, Tuesday at 5 p.m. is cocktail hour, and Thursday at 10:30 a.m. is coffee clutch. And there will be emails and links on the website for all of those different events. A reminder that our theme this year is Serve to Change Lives. I hope everyone will be serving this week, and we will see you again next week. Thank you.
Thanks, Don. Great meeting.